For those of you that attended the webinar last time on Fierce Conversations, this is our second webinar. So we are going to get started. And I'm going to start the webcam and start sharing with you. And here we go. So you may have heard this conversation last time. You may have, if you weren't on this call, you may have had the opportunity to listen to the webinar. And if not, it's there for you. But today is the second webinar. And I wanted to share with all of you this component of a model of fierce conversations. I brought my book with me today. You can see it's well used. In fact, this Fierce Conversations book I bought in the States one day because I was curious. I wondered, what could be a fierce conversation? And you can see it's well read and well loved. It might be something that you'd like to pick up too. There are many other training components in the Fierce Conversation model that I've taken. And Susan Scott does a review of some of them in her book, Fierce Conversations, or you can look on the website and we'll give you further information. For today, I picked this model as I thought it may help you in your roles. The other thing to remember is that when I do this training, we practice. So I'm going to be assigning you some homework today as we move on, because practice will help you feel more comfortable. So I hope that after today, you find somebody who you could practice with, because the goal is to become natural. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the principles of fierce conversations. Last week, we reviewed the objectives and the transformational ideas for fierce. Today, we're going to turn our attention on how to live them out. I'm going to review the 7 principles, and as I do, I'm going to give you your first component of homework. So paying attention as you hear the 7, I want you to pick one of these principles that you are going to write down, because we know when we write down a goal that we have a 90% chance of accomplishing it. And you will find the one that as I present these 7 principles, you'll say, that's the one that has my name on it. So the first one, master the courage to interrogate reality, is the central function of a leader. It is really important. In fact, at the public leadership at Harvard JFK School of Government, they say that master the courage to interrogate reality is the central function of a leader. It's what high-functioning human beings do. And as trustees, you are continually mastering that conversation. I know that. The second component, maybe this has your name on it, you can let me know, is we put on our boss face. How many of you have been to a meeting where you decide not to be fully yourself? When the conversation is real, the change will occur before the conversation is over. In the IPEC training that I mentioned, part of the coach training that I've done, different than fierce conversation, we talk about the gremlin who sits on your shoulder, and it might be chirping in your ear, giving you negative thoughts. The gremlin can block our ability to be fully present. So what you want to do is what this says, is come out from behind yourself into the conversation and make it real. That's the second principle of fierce conversations. The third principle of fierce conversations, we talked about that last week. It was an equation. The conversation is the relationship, or C equals R. How many of you multitask? I do. I gotta tell you, I do multitask. And sometimes I know when I multitask, I'm not present. Well, for the person that you're trying to build the relationship with, you want to think about what message are you giving? Because if you're not present in the conversation, it will feel like for that person that it's surface. And if you have a surface conversation, then it's a surface relationship. Be present and lean in. Oh, I forgot to put that one up. Well, I guess that might have been one of your homework pieces. So there it is conversation. Oh, pardon me, my quote is wrong. I messed that up. It's be prepared, be here prepared to be nowhere else. So when you think about that, that's where I was talking about the being present. The fourth piece of the principles of fierce conversations, checking in with any of you. I wonder if any of you have started one that you're loving so far and that you are going to pick as your homework, but there's a few more to come, is tackle your toughest challenge today. How many of you procrastinate, especially when it comes to be delivering an uncomfortable information? An analogy might be as you feel like you're carrying a heavy backpack, and when in the conversation it seems like it'll be really difficult. Or another way to think about tackling your toughest challenge is how many of you have ever had a rock in your shoe in the last couple of weeks as we're out in our sandals, and you know you can't get that rock out of your shoe. You shake your shoe, you shake your leg, it's still sitting there. That kind of conversation can be what it feels like. Think about those obstacles that are in your way. Today is the day for you to have the conversation you're avoiding. Tackle your toughest challenge today. That might be your goal. The fifth one, obey your instincts. All of you know, often in fact, people will say, I knew that was true. I knew it inside me. We are human beings. Sometimes our instinct, though, is fear. Instincts may not always be right, but be willing to be wrong. Think about what's guiding you. That will actually show who you are and how genuine you are. It's all right to be wrong. People like that, actually. It makes them feel better, too, because sometimes as we are wrong, we learn something new. So you've got 5, and here's the 6th. Remember your homework. You've got to be thinking about which one of these are you choosing as your 30-day challenge. Take responsibility for your emotional wake. We talked about that slightly last week. As leaders, everyone leaves a mark. Think about a comment that might have ripped you apart, or one that may have strengthened you. Each conversation leaves an emotional wake. Just like when we're skiing on the water, or when we're skiing down a snowy mountain. If we ski into the wake, sometimes you fall over, sometimes it strengthens you and makes you better at what you're doing. So think about the conversation and how the emotional wake, I really believe this is an important component for us always to be reviewing and thinking about how you're taking your responsibility for that. A comment somebody said to you 3 years ago might leave you in therapy. Beware of your impact you have on people. Learn to deliver the message with clarity, conviction, and compassion. That's really an important part of the principles of fierce conversations. Okay, here we go. Number 7. All of you are starting to see there's 7 principles. One of those is going to be your homework. I might even be asking you if anybody's picked a challenge in a second. So the 7th one is let silence do the heavy lifting. Insight occurs with space between words. Go deep. Memorable conversations have breathing spaces. I had an aunt who could never stop talking. In fact, I don't even think she was breathing. The only time I believe she did is maybe when she smoked. So we got to give people breathing. Because when we give breathing spaces, that invites people into conversation. Angeles Arian said, where in your life did you become uncomfortable with the sweet territory of silence? This is the 7 principles in quick form. If I was doing a workshop with you, we would actually take those and we would unpack what each one of those meant to you. Has anybody picked a challenge? You can write that in right now. If you've got a challenge, put what number might be the one that you want to think about is going to be your challenge, your 30-day challenge. That's what I'm going to put out to you you'll be reminded your homework not to worry at the end. When you write down that challenge and post it in front of you, it'll be there to remind you to think about which principle are you going to work on. I see somebody's going to work on number 1. Way to go. Master the courage to interrogate reality. How can we learn about what people are talking about? It is the central function of the leader. Anybody else? Okay, we're going to go into the model today that we're going to be spending the rest of the time in. And it's called the Confrontation Conversation. So welcome to this model of Fierce Conversations. I'd like you to think of someone whose behavior you want to change. When you contemplate trying to have this conversation, what do you feel? Let me know. I know for me, when I personalize that to think about somebody who I want to see some behaviors change, sometimes I feel anxious, sometimes I feel scared, and other times I think this is tremendous, tremendous opportunity. It could change the trajectory of someone's life. So think about that. Who could it be that you would like to change someone's behavior? I see that my slide is not where I wanted it to be. That is a little strange. Hold on. Well, I'm going to slide back and I'm going to just talk to you about some of the questions. Sorry about that. So there's some questions I'd like you to consider and reflect on. And again, when I would do this workshop, I'd actually put these questions up and we would do some group processing on that too. What are some strategies we use in an attempt to change someone's behavior, other than being direct and clear? Think about that. You can call into that. What are some strategies you use in an attempt to change someone's behavior? How do you justify not having this conversation? I know sometimes I start telling myself it's the right thing to do, but how do you justify it? What are your fears? What's at loss if you don't have that conversation? What are the prices we pay for not confronting? And my favorite one, the last one, is what's to gain if you have this conversation and it's going well? What could change? That is the opportunities to think moving forward in a fierce conversation model. So we're going to move to the next slide. I don't know what happened to my disappearing slide, but it made it just a little bit fun for me to look at. So we're going to move into this confrontation model. And you can see there, it looks a little bit like a skull and a crossbones, and that's not what it's to be. So the base of the confrontation model is all confrontation is a search for the truth. Remember in our last session, I talked about con, C-O-N, with. So we're with somebody, we're getting in front of it, and it's a search for the truth. It's for us to grow in understanding. So let's look at this item, or let's look at this picture, this graphic, in a little different way than a skull and crossbones. We need to confront the issue, not the person. We need to think about the flashlight and the magnifying glass as a shining light on all aspects of the issue and really bring the issue into focus. We need to be an explorer with the issue. Talked about last time. Lean in and be curious. So here's time for a story. All of you can just sit back. You're not going to hear it. You're not going to see the story. I'm going to read it to you. It's a story about Sam and Jackie. And I want you to think about the confrontation and the search for the truth. Sam's the CEO in a software development company, and he's being coached by Susan. That would be Susan Scott, just in case you were wondering. Sam's a thoughtful leader and a truly, truly good human being who was beaming when Susan walked into his office for their monthly one-to-one meeting. He reported he'd successfully recruited Jackie, known in the software industry as a miracle worker whose reputation had never missed a deadline. Jackie had agreed to head up Sam's software development team for 8 months. Sam had estimated that was the timeline he needed for the latest version of software, bringing it from concept to reality. Sam and his competitors ran neck and neck in their attempts to produce the newest, slickest software versions. And Sam felt with Jackie heading the team, we'll hit our target date. Getting Jackie is a real coup. She has lots of options, including working with one of our competitors. She chose us. She starts tomorrow. This is too good to be true. 30 days later, Susan comes back to visit Sam on their month-to-month meeting. She asks him, what's the most important thing that you and I should be talking about today? He said, never ever let me tell you that something's too good to be true. Well, what happened? Well, shortly after Jackie came on board, John pulled into the parking lot at the same time as Sam and said he tried to work with Jackie. Things seemed a bit tense. And then he was in asking Jackie some questions, and she said to him, I don't have time for private tutoring sessions. Work it out on your own time. John said that's how she typically dealt with people. He thought. Sam said to John, it's just a bump in the road. A week later, Sarah passed him in the hall and said, did you hear about the meeting? No. There's a glitch in the software and nobody knew how to resolve it. Jackie had drawn it on flip paper and suddenly she ripped it up, threw it on the floor and said, I thought you were better than this. This team is not what I signed up for. Again, a big surprise and some feedback. Then the most important part of the conversation happened. Peter, who had been Sam's loyal employee, his person that he depended on greatly, told him, I've never listened to headhunters. They've called me from time to time, but I'm so loyal to this company, I don't want to leave. But after what I'm seeing with Jackie, I scheduled a meeting with the recruiter. Sam turned white because Peter had told him he would cancel the meeting, that he didn't want to leave. He said, of course, I need to know what's going on. He said, Jackie's brilliant, there's no doubt about it, but she's got sharp edges and people are getting hurt. I doubt I'm not the only person that are being hurt. So do you think that Sam needs to confront Jackie? They have a problem. So now we're going to go into the model of how would you solve this? What would you do? Before we start with that, we need to talk about what are some common errors to get started, because we don't want Sam to make some common errors. So the first one would be starting the conversation with Jackie with, so how's it going? Well, we already know how it's going and it's not going well. That's not an authentic way to begin a conversation. The next piece is the sandwich method. The sandwich method is that you say something nice, that's your bread, and then pow, your meat, and then you finish with something nice. Example, Jackie, you're so brilliant, your leadership sucks, and I really am glad you joined our team. A compliment is a different conversation, but not a fierce conversation. The too many pillows method in delivering a message means real messages get lost. It might be hiding behind a policy, there's no alignment. The next component is writing a script. What you plan to say, and before you plan it, and you plan the response for the other person. It never goes that way. We need to remember the conversation is with the person. And the last one is you lose it. It might have happened to you when you're raising teenagers. You might feel lighter, but the other person feels heavier. Remember, it's about the emotional weight. So, what does the model look like? Well, the model requires prep. It requires a fair bit of prep ahead of time so that you know what you're going to do. So we're going to move through the preparation stages. So some things that I want you to know about is you need to write out this script, and once you've finished it, you need to memorize it and you need to practice it, and it will take you about 60 seconds when it's finished. So 60 seconds for somebody when you're delivering a message is tolerable. Beyond that, it will feel like an attack. But it could be great things you're measuring. Remember, this is about real conversation, so think about that. So it's a formula to follow. I've used it many times, and I can tell you it works. But the best way it works is with practice. So name the issue is the first part. Name the behavior that's causing the problem and the area it's impacting. For example, with Jackie, I want to talk to you about, your leadership style and the effect it's having on the team. Stay free from judgment and remember who you're talking with. Second, you need an example. Think about a camera. Think about if you were to capture what that conversation in the Sam and Jackie story was. What would you capture as one of the key elements of that story? I'm not going to give that to you. I want you to think about what you heard. Don't go on and on. Be clear and concise and simple. The next part of what you need to do is describe your emotions on how you're feeling about the situation. Remember, EQ will show your vulnerability. Stay away from words like disappointment. Those will be judgmental. Clarify. What's at stake? Thinking about the Sam and Jackie story. Is it the team? Was it the software development? Was it delivering things on time? Think about what's at stake for the other person. What was at stake for Jackie if things weren't successful? So that's the next part that you need to prepare. Be accountable to your contribution to the problem. Offer that you will help with the change. Stay focused. Oops. When you're indicating your wish to resolve the issue, I want you to really think about that component. Back into number 5. I just want to go back to that one a little bit. Because the person needs to know you're genuine. Remember, C equals R. And that part is really important for them to feel like, yes, you are going to be there with them. The other piece to remember in number 6, indicate your wish to resolve the issue. This is not used for terminating employment. You want to show your good intention to resolve the problem. Restate the issue and the invitation to work together. And the 7th part of this conversation is you invite the other person to talk. Be present, ask questions. You get into a curious mode. You lean in, as I talked about last week, and you seek understanding. You're only present in the conversation for you to understand your truth. You want to work together with this person for the best possible decision. Yes, you offer a different lens to look at the situation. Absolutely, that's what you're doing. And it is like lenses, because you're going to see something different than that person does. And we don't know and have no way of knowing what really is happening with Jackie at this point. So, we've gone into a couple of components of what the steps are. This might happen to you. Maybe it only happens in my world. There are 3 components. Jackie's reaction might be denied. That didn't happen. I did not throw that paper. I did not talk to those people like that. They're making it up. Defend. You might blame others. You may want to defend our behavior. Jackie might say, you know what? I thought that this team knew way more about software development. And I know those things, but they don't. Or they might deflect. Jackie used this to getting the problem to go somewhere. They might deflect it and get it to go somewhere else. It's not about this. It wasn't about the software development or my leadership. It was about such and such. So that might happen too. But we're going to move into the next slide. So you've done the conversation, but you want to go further. You want to find and develop some further components to the conversation. Now, when you look into 8, what I put up there is you're going to really inquire into your partner's views. You're going to use paraphrasing. Paraphrasing means you've heard the person say, I'm really frustrated about the way that John is not provided leadership, accompanying my leadership. So you're really frustrated with John not accompanying your leadership. Is that what I hear you saying? To get your growth and understanding and really check with them. You want to do some perception checks. You want to dig in for full understanding, and don't be satisfied on the surface. Remember that it creates a surface relationship. And you want to make sure that the person you're with, that hears you and really fully understands and acknowledges their position and interests. In Fierce, there's a whole other model in this in coaching conversations that can go with that. But that's not what today is about. This is just looking at the confrontation model. As you move through the end, you want to do some reflections. Where are we now? What have we learned? What do we need to resolve? What didn't we say? How can you ask that person, what was unsaid? Remember the mojitos last week? You want to hear what's unsaid. Have we moved? What's our new understanding? How can we move forward from here given this new understanding? And then create a new agreement and a method to hold on each other accountable. And in that piece, you're going to be spending time together. You can do fierce conversations once you get going on this. Oh, sorry, I didn't put those up for you. You can do it on the fly. Once you get really comfortable with this, you can actually create a chart like this, or you can pull it off the webinar, and you can practice this. So it just becomes on the fly. This is just an example of an on-the-fly conversation. Name the issue, specific example, always go back to the emotions, clarify why it's important, identify your contribution to the issue, indicate your wish to resolve it, and invite your partner to present. Confrontation on the fly is also less than 60 seconds. So that's really important to do. And on the fly, I highly, highly recommend you make sure you practice. So if you want to do preparation, and or if you're the type of learner that you just like words in front of you that will help you as a learner, what's your preparation? What's the issue? What's an example? What are the emotions? What's the why? How do you resolve it, and how do you invite it? I know that I've seen other people, when they're using this model, they get the old-fashioned recipe card in front of them, and they put those words there, even after they've memorized it and said, and even when they're talking to someone, to be genuine, say, I'm learning something. I need a little bit of a cheat sheet in front of me to help guide me, because I want to make sure I'm doing the best I can do with you so that I can be part of this conversation. That's called on the fly. That's another way to do it. So you're going to look at different models that I presented today. The one is much more in depth. You want to really practice it. These ones on the fly, once you get more comfortable, they'll become natural. They'll become part of your who. And you'll start to go, oh, I'm doing that, and I didn't even realize that I'm doing that. I keep even a little bit of a cheat sheet in front of my desk when I'm on the phone with somebody. If somebody actually, sometimes I'm using that as a reflective conversation. Someone presents this, and I'll say, oh, it sounds like the issue is. What I've heard you say is an example of that is, wow, I feel, as the person is presented that, why is that important? It might be important for student learning or for the parent piece, and I can help you with resolving it. Would you like some coaching with this? Would you like another follow-up conversation? And invite that person in there. I've done it in a reverse way too, as you become more natural and more accustomed to it, because that's what's really important in Fierce, is each one of the models in Fierce, and there's several others that I mentioned last time. There's ones on generations, there's ones on coaching, there's ones on managing your time, there's ones on building teams, it's called the team ball model, and there's ones on accountability. Each one of those has elements of each other's models. The foundations stay the same, the premise of the work all stays the same, and yet the skill base and the templates that you use help develop your conversation models in a deeper way. So that's conversation and on the fly. Before we go into the end, I just wanted to mention to you again, if you're interested in doing some further reading on Susan's work, you can also see her. There's some YouTubes with her speaking about Fierce Conversations, and you can have some time with that. But each one of the components of the book, as you can see, mine's all marked up, talks about the different kinds of models that Susan Scott wrote then. Now, when she wrote this book, this was several years ago, it's been updated over the years, but this gives you a really clear foundation. Lots of quotes, Lots of things that you'll even hear that I have spoken up about in these really brief periods of times. But because she's a master storyteller, she also gives you relations of different stories that you can think about that make it so it is real for you. So it may be something, a book study or some conversations the trustees want to do to delve into this deeper. And it's not a difficult read. It's one you could even read on your deck. Just one other piece, just a piece of advice. I did try some of the confrontations models with my own daughters when they were a little bit younger. I don't recommend starting that with your kids. Start it with somebody who you feel safe with, because sometimes teenagers give you some really clear information that maybe you didn't want to do. So we're coming to the end of this webinar. I want to thank all of you for joining me. In case there's some questions, I can answer a couple of questions before we sign off. And certainly if there's questions afterwards, you can contact me at Pembina Trails, sschmidt@pembinatrails.ca, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point around Fierce Conversations or around the training. But I'll look for a minute. I'll just let silence do the heavy lifting for just a couple of seconds, and for you to let me know if there's any questions you have at this point or comments. Okay, I have one question. How can we move forward or improve when people are satisfied with the status quo? It's an interesting question. And when you think about status quo, I'm wondering if that would be some work to develop. What do you mean by status quo? What do you mean by, is that status? Remember, last time I talked about some different leadership models. And if you go back to the last webinar, there's some, and I don't have that up here today, but we looked at different leadership models. So thinking about innovation, what does innovation mean? How do you move forward to align yourself with school change, with student change, with information technology, with all the changes there? So it might be some visioning to think about how an improvement, and it might be some things to talk and identify, naming the issue. Is the issue status quo? I think unpacking that and finding out what the name of the issue is and thinking about that as a group is really an important opportunity first, and then framing through what the examples are and what do you mean by status quo. So I would recommend to go back into that confrontation model and see, is that the question you're asking? Because I'm not sure. And what really truly is the issue that you want to address. So that would be a suggestion from me. Anybody else? So I gave you some homework. There were seven components of Fierce Conversations at the second slide I gave you. I want you to pick one today and think about a 30-day challenge. Write it down or put it in your phone as a calendar reminder. And I want you to think about how you're going to use that to guide you in moving forward. So I also mentioned to you to think about the confrontation conversation. Sorry, just a little technological blip. In thinking about that, think about what you've learned. Pick somebody to practice with. The first times you're going to have paper in front of you. That's all right. You're going to move towards that 60-second conversation. You're going to move towards memorizing it. Find somebody who will want to lean in with you, be part of the conversation. Go fierce, have fun, and thank you to MSBA and Janice Arnold for having me join in this wonderful opportunity. And we are ready to go.